Recording in progress.
Yeah, all right. I'll call the meeting to order. We'll start off with a roll call. McKee here, Bodema. Here. Nichols.
Here.
And Councilors Varenkamp and Schultz are excused. Might show up during potentially one of them, I'm not
It
sure.
sounded like there was a potential that Counselor Camp would be able to be here, but closer to 6 o'clock.
We'll play it by ear. Then we will just get into the subject of the work session, which is police officer recruitment and retention. And I will hand it off to you, Matt.
All right, thank you. So I'll start by saying that, there's two caveats to this conversation, is that, one, this is a separate but related conversation to overall compensation, which I think the council found that we need to address, and was mentioned during the administrator hiring process as well. Secondarily, these are, the ones brought forward are speaking specifically to ones that seem to fit police officers. Some of them come out of wellness initiatives, some of them are things done in other police departments. But it's important to note that there's ripple effects and organization-wide effects that could follow these depending on what route the council chooses to go. So just keeping in mind as we have this conversation, framing it around those two other conversations are ongoing and interrelated. But that being said, I think this really comes out of the pretty dramatic hiring landscape in law enforcement right now. There is a severe shortage of good employees. I believe we have good cops here, and our goal, first of all, would be to keep the ones that we have, and also be better than the next place to work. And I think a lot of these items in this speak to quality of workplace. We've acknowledged as a smaller city that we're never going to be the highest paid city in the state, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't be one of the best places to work. And I think that this is really speaking towards trying to add a little bit more balance. We know the private sector's come a long ways in employee benefits and just acknowledging how employees are treated. So I'll try and be brief as I go through a brief explanation of the items that were brought forward. These items, some of them were items that I've encountered through the profession. I also sent out a survey to all of our police officers and said, please give me your best recruitment and retention ideas. And they're almost nearly all of the ones that they brought forward are included in here as well. So as we discussed, there are some of them that I also don't necessarily support or am not advocating for, but I thought it was important that they make it in front of you guys as some options, and that the requests of our police officers are also heard for you guys and for your benefit. So we'll get started. I'm going to explain them all, and then we also have a spreadsheet to get just a ballpark of costs. Obviously, everything is discretionary in here. Whether the council chooses to do everything or nothing, or different things to varying degrees, are all optional. So once we get down there, the spreadsheet should at least help guide if you're trying to rank order or value rank some of the options. So the first one that was sent out to you was paid sabbatical. This is born out of really the employee mental health aspect. I think this is starting to emerge in law enforcement. We'll start seeing it more. I believe the city of Paynesville is currently doing it. It was also recommended by our mental health service provider, Marie Ridgway, as one of the options that agencies should consider for officers' wellness. And I think, mental support and mental wellness for our officers should be at the highlight of some of the things that we're looking at. In the past, our city has, we've had officers that have suffered from mental injuries, and I think that this is really designed to help reset and recharge the officers. So this one is rooted in getting that kind of clean break once every 4 years for about 30 days, 28 to 30 days for those police officers. And, as we mentioned in there, it takes about 8 days for a person to reach their initial peak recovery period. And there can also be caveats as far as what, officers work on self-care, and, there can be other things that are outlined in there, but it's really just kind of that chance to de-stress. A lot of times PTO is spent, especially with, the younger officers, PTO is spent taking kids to the doctor or taking time off so that they can work overtime or second jobs. So I think this would be something that could be beneficial if it's structured correctly to give people that kind of mental recovery time. The next one is vacation reimbursement. This is there's a little bit more to this than the title suggests. What this is encouraging officers, again, to recruit during their time off rather than taking time off to work. This would be structured as a reimbursement for travel or recreation expenses. And again, this would be under the mental wellness angle, and encouraging the officers to connect with their family members and whether that's take a family trip or however they choose to do it, but submitting for approvable, reimbursable vacation expenses as opposed to just taking the time off to work elsewhere. I think it would probably make sense to allow it to be carried over to a certain extent. Here was, the numbers made, just for the example, were for $1,000, up to $1,000 a year, which could be carried over for up to 3 years. So, some of those could be used in conjunction if there was consideration for the sabbatical and the vacation reimbursement, or, yes.
Would it make sense to vary the amount based on seniority or tenure or role, like rank within the force?
Certainly could. Yeah.
Incentivize people to, as they've spent more time and advanced, make that more valuable to them?
Yeah. I think there's, I don't know, I'm guessing as long as there wouldn't be any wage equity issues as it relates to age, I would think not, sorry about that, since we would be inversely paying more, I would assume that would not be an issue.
Yeah, we'd have to look into that portion a little bit and how it impacts. Generally, pay equity is based on base pay, but we'd have to we'd want to verify, all of these we'd want to verify some of those impacts to the greater.
Have any of you worked at a place with mandatory sabbaticals?
No.
If not,
So my company has a mandatory 6-month sabbatical
really?
for every 10 years you work there. Mandatory.
That sounds great.
Except, I would never do that, and I never have. And
So how mandatory is it?
it's in the employee handbook.
Gotcha.
If you don't take it, are you locked out?
I don't know what happens. I have no idea. I'm just saying, like, I would actually love to take a 6-month sabbatical,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make sense for me. And I'll take a sabbatical when I die. Be forever then. It's kind of interesting, and in theory, it's awesome. In theory, I would be able to go away and recharge, and I've never showered for 6 months and walk all around Montana and
Or
northern
only shower
Minnesota.
for 6 months.
Yeah, or only shower. I don't know. I just wanted anybody else that had experience there. I have experience with it.
Nice.
So, and I think that working in a reimbursement would require that they're actually accomplishing what our goal is for that, that recreation aspect. And if it's, we can, you can put whatever stipulations you want. And to your point, I think you mentioned, I would see no reason why you probably couldn't create a step process to it similar to the wage scale or something similar to that. So I think there's options there.
Or the PTO, could be a fraction of PTO, potentially.
Yep. In fact, I think some of these are broken out in kind of what the hourly cost is when we get to the spreadsheet, so you'll kind of see that that's actually how we figure for accruals as well for a lot of these, is how does the city accumulate cost over time for the different types of options shown here. The additional retirement health insurance contributions, the city actually used to pay for, is it 50% of the premium for a retired police officer if they had 15 years of service with the city. That provision was negotiated out of the contract, so we have a couple of officers remaining that still have that upon retirement. One of the reasons that you see this frequently with law enforcement is because of that encouraged earlier retirement age. As officers start getting past that 55, you start seeing more injuries, more, as some people say, it's a young man's game or young woman's game, and
They fall off their bike, for example.
yeah, well, and that you just don't
Like the
rebound as
president.
quickly either.
That was one of the greatest.
And so with law enforcement, a lot of those skills don't necessarily transfer easily to the private sector. So what do you see cops doing when they retire? They're working at Costco or Walmart. They're just trying to find a job with health insurance benefits. And they're some of them are left working that window for that 10 to 15 years until they hit 65, trying to find something that pays health insurance. So this is really a different approach to it in that it would maybe accomplish, it would create some We walked away from it completely from the negotiated standpoint that this would maybe start a contribution, that it would maybe alleviate some of those stresses upon retirement. And if it was structured appropriately, I believe you could have it be a significant retention incentive. That if it was structured not as an accrued entitlement, but as a upon separation, formulaically upon months of service, this certain amount times years of service will equate to what a one-time payout was. Now, the city could choose to fund that as that debt was accrued, therefore, not putting itself in the hole, and choose to fund that account to whatever degree was appropriate, and could decide if the city does fund that liability, could decide whether that interest goes back to the city or is, applied to the officers, or however that might work. But the thought process is that if something like, I think we used in the example, $300 a month, that $3,600 a year, an officer with 5 years on would have, $18,000 in this bank. A lot of the police departments right now are offering hiring bonuses up $5 and even $10,000. If our officers that had been here for 5 years were walking away from 15,000 to gain 5 or 10, certainly, at least it would seem to somewhat negate the one-time benefit of a potential hiring bonus elsewhere.
And if they were to leave before retirement age?
Ideally, they would not be eligible for it. We'd have to see how we can legally structure these items.
Yes.
As we know, any expenditure has to be related to the public good, but many of these are related to wellness, employee benefits, things like that. So in my mind, ideally, if they don't retire as a police officer, they would not be eligible. That would really be important as to how it was structured, because if it's structured as an accrued benefit, then we would be mandated to pay them out upon separation. But if it was structured as a one-time benefit upon retirement, I believe that there would maybe be a formulaic way to do it. Now, the city funding it as it incurs the liability might just be a function on the backside of how we chose to fund a liability like that.
What I like about it is it seems to be a very potent retention tool for really good officers who start young, especially with this department. If you're trying to get more experienced officers who maybe don't have as many years to accrue, it might be less good at retaining them. And I would want to be careful. I know we have excellent officers today, on balance. That hopefully will always be true. But does it create a difficulty with, if we were to develop a problem in the future, how would we be able to deal with that?
Right. Yeah, I think that would probably have to be, to your point, spelled out early on, that if a person was, depending on terms of separation, would impact whether or not an employee was eligible for that. If an employee was fired, would they be eligible if it was a separation, and so on down the line. Yeah, those would all be definitely some details to iron out.
They have in the private sector golden handcuffs, and I've looked into whether we could, the public sector, it's always challenging to do that. But this seems like a golden handcuff. Basically, if you say it's for health, you could just say it's for nothing. You don't, it sounds like you need an identifiable need, which would be healthcare. They actually could buy an ATV or a cabin with it if they wanted, right?
Well,
or does it have to go to healthcare premium?
I think how we would structure it is right now, upon separation, an employee's accrual, or upon retirement, their accruals go into a health savings bank, not an HSA fund, but an
A
actual.
post-retirement healthcare savings plan.
Oh, okay.
And so since we do that already for the city, that their accruals get converted 100% into post-retirement health insurance, this would go into the same type of account. So those expenditures would be subject to the same.
Okay, so long as we don't get in a jam about it.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we need to check in to can we make it work in that? We have some of those technical, if this is something we want to pursue, we need to figure out how to technically do it and make sure that, as Matt said, that it meets the public purpose, kind of.
Yeah. Or if they get fired, if they walk away, then we wouldn't be on the hook for it.
Yeah, so we really want to have a very structured, this would need to be very structured.
And to your guys' point, it could also be a tool that, if the city does fund it along the way, that if the city wanted to offer early retirements, this might be an option saying, employees could be eligible, for this time period. If they, take an early retirement, we would you know, I don't know. I mean, that would all really kind of be in the details of how it was drawn up. So I think that on this first page, I really think that, in my opinion, those are the three that are gonna have the biggest impact. Of course, they carry big price tags too. But if you wanna talk about value-based as it relates to recruitment and retention, I think those are three big ones that very few people are doing that would probably set us apart. A few of these that we'll get to later, a lot of agencies either are doing or employees have options in other ways to get them. So qualifying club membership or personal development lessons. You know, one of them, it was talked about, well, what about a health club membership? Sometimes even our health insurance plans in the past have provided it. We found limited participation in the health club membership reimbursement. And this opens it up a little bit more to anything that would support
Is
physical.
that a police
wellness.
officer joke?
What's that?
Limited participation in health club experience.
Could be. But it was talking about, well, if there's a approval for either physical wellness or job-related skills. So health club, gun club, cycling club, gym membership, it would open that up a little bit more to encourage physical activity. You know, if you're looking at something in the range of $100 a month, I don't know if that makes a difference of an employee leaving here or not, or would tip the scales for an employee choosing to work
That's a
here or
good
not.
pun too. You're just making jokes, you don't even know it.
So, you know, something like this would maybe be.
Could be part of a cafeteria plan.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I think-
Another good pun.
There we go. It's all the food and exercise puns. We're full of them. So it would have, I would recommend that if something like that was considered, it probably isn't a standalone value, but could be part of a cafeteria option. It was brought forward additional career opportunities. I think for a small department, we do have a lot of opportunities, but this is also maybe one of those sweet spots where it does have a cost to the city, but also a benefit to the city. So if the city were to add something that was more investigative or street crimes or something like that, it would mean the addition of staff, but it would be an opportunity within the department for movement for the officers. And obviously, the community would see the benefits of those.
May I ask a question? It's also for Kevin and Jess, but obviously fitness, and we have that as part of our health insurance, and a lot of companies do. As we think about these incentives and how hard it is to attract and retain talent, I think we have to think about also like some of these apply towards regular.
100%. I think that was gonna be one of the things I wanted to follow up on. I think there are several items could be applied across the board as a retention for the entire city as we're struggling significantly in law enforcement, but other areas in the city, there are some ideas we've been floated from Public Works on looking at other options, not on the list here, so we will certainly be exploring all of those.
Yeah, and those are some points that Alan made as well. And so, once I get through these, I was kind of going to share what Alan's thoughts were on some of them, since he asked me to share some of those and wasn't able to be here. Fitness incentives can take a lot of forms, just as you had just mentioned, John. A lot of the agencies, if it's a fitness test, they're doing something like a rowing test, or where agencies can run into problems is you have to make sure that it doesn't disproportionately impact individuals based on gender, age, or other factors. So they can be a little bit complex if you're going to look solely at a fitness performance base. Other agencies do it as a wellness incentive, so they require that officers might, or staff might go to attend, a financial wellness, any kind of a spiritual wellness, a mental health, and they have to, from a menu, check a certain number of boxes, and once they achieve the correct number of items on that list, that they then receive that incentive pay. So it requires them to take an active role in wellness. So that's a little bit different approach. Assigned take-home squads was brought up. I see this having a bigger impact in, definitely with the recruitment and retention with new people coming into the profession. Most rural counties do assigned take-home squads. What's the net cost to that is really going to be the startup. There's a capital cost and outlay for I think we would need at least 4 squads to get if we were to implement this today. Now, once the squad cars are in place, they're still gonna accumulate the same number of patrol miles. So for instance, right now, our squad cars run multiple shifts a day, so they cycle out after that 3-4 year range. If we were to go to assigned squads, we would have more cars, but we'd be getting longer life out of them. So the net patrol miles remains the same. The net cost to the city certainly is in managing a bigger fleet, and B, really that whatever we set that limit as for to and from work, as to how far away a person will be able to take that squad car. This is suggested solely as just for work use. They wouldn't be able to go to the grocery store or, run errands or use it in place of a personal vehicle. But it would be one designated office space. They're not getting into a car with someone else's garbage and candy wrappers and mud in there. I mean, it's, when you share cars with someone on several people a day, it gets to be a fairly intimate setting. So there's, that was brought forward as a recommendation. Financial planning services, I think that would be another one that's, in my mind, would be administered similar to our current mental health services, maybe on a contract basis. I believe that a lot of the people that are going to do that already, and the ones that wouldn't maybe don't. But I think it's definitely a benefit to those if you can find a good service that I believe would probably be something, again, if it was offered as part of a cafeteria option or some other things. And I know you guys have far more experience in the financial planning world than I do, so certainly any insight that you guys have would be appreciated as well.
I think the key would be making sure that whoever you select for that, if it's a city service provider, that it's a fiduciary and not vested in any particular product type or that sort of thing.
Sure.
That would be it. Generally, what you find on a contract financial planning basis is it's like the not as good ones. And so, I don't know. I would have hours of opinions about that. If we get to that point, I'll share them.
The education financial incentives. So currently we'll pay for, our city will reimburse for trainings or degrees that are relevant to an employee's current role. This kind of would look at flipping that around, well, ideally flipping it around, that the city would pay an education incentive for an employee as a percentage of the employee's base wage once they have that degree or other, relevant certificate. We would have to decide what they are, what amount that is, and I would guess that maybe it would come at the expense of I don't know if the city wants to choose to pay for the degree and pay for the increased salary once they have it. Maybe the city does. That currently we do just the educational hours, but the way some cities have it set up is that an employee with a bachelor's degree would receive 2% of their base wage. An employee with a bachelor's degree, 4%. An employee with a master's degree, 6%. I would say there'd probably be some carve-outs that, if I had a master's degree in underwater basket weaving, it might not be applicable on my position, that maybe it would have to be in the preferred qualifications for the job, in the job description. But this also enters the conversation that we've had about currently our pay scale is based on, as we grade positions, an employee that's only making the minimum qualifications, and very few of our employees are only at the minimum qualifications. Most of them far exceed that. So this might actually make up some ground in paying employees for what they actually bring to the table for the city.
Is that part of potentially the union negotiations? I'm gonna say they really don't account for that in a union slide position thing, do they? It's like if somebody is a police officer and an EMT and has their master's in public safety, that's not accounted for in that
Some
slide
cities,
I
scale.
would say some cities do it.
But in ours, it's not.
Right.
In ours, it is not.
So that could this is also something that could potentially,
That was in the packet, right? That's one of the ideas we're going to talk about.
Yes, that's one of the
later.
ideas we'll talk about with compensation as an overall discussion.
so the next one was compensated community service hours, which I guess really somewhat equates to paid time off. I think if you did up to 4 hours of comp time, and the way some places do it, it's if you're coaching your child's little league or something like that would qualify. there's different schools of thought that it would only be for hours volunteered in the community. But I think at that point, you're just paying them on the clock to go do it. So I don't know if this changes or if this makes a difference in recruitment and retention or would sway somebody's desire to work here. Maybe it would help get people out in the community, but then it also removes them from, at the expense of, as several of these do, means that they're also not patrolling, but we're paying them, so,
We have that at our company
okay.
for a compensated community service hour.
Is it
do you
taken
think of
advantage
there?
of?
People do it. I think I'm either a non-exempt or exempt. This wouldn't apply to me, but people do it, and it creates community cohesiveness within the workforce. People do things together, and it doesn't subtract from their paycheck. And the office does a lot of things as a collective, so it's not only beneficial for the people that do it, but for office cohesion, and it's always a positive impact if a collective group of, in our case, UBS employees go and do something, or if like the Corcoran cops go and, spend 4 hours at Feed My Starving Children, it's good for that too.
Yep, definitely. Hiring and referral bonuses. This one was that employees, upon successful completion of probation, would have a $5,000 hiring bonus. There are agencies that are doing this throughout the metro. And then also talking about a referral bonus for employees that referred that employee and stayed for more than 2 years. As an individual, I don't know if I'm convinced that changes dramatically where a person's gonna work, other than, if a person's choosing between here and someplace that has the hiring bonus. I think at the end of the day, your wages have to be competitive. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably gonna come down to where they'd be happier working. I don't know how much this moves the scale, but it is probably one of the most highlighted tools that other cities are using currently.
It broadens the funnel coming into the process.
Yes. Obviously, you'd run into, you might have, if you have an employee that applies, you're gonna have multiple employees. If more than one employee knows them, they're gonna be competing for, well, put my name down, or put my name down. I don't know if this would make employees recruit harder or not. I think people are naturally wanna work with good people, so they're gonna recruit them regardless, I would think.
Right. Typically, you'd think if you're working somewhere and your friend is in that field and there's an opening at your job and he's looking for a job or she's looking for a job, you would kind of be recruiting unofficially anyway.
So, you're also paying that $5,000 towards somebody that's been here for 1 year with very little experience. Does that create loyalty? I don't know if that does. You're also not giving it to the people that have been here for 15 or 20 years. So it's, probably a narrow window. Or if you send somebody out to recruit at a college or tech school, are they gonna try and get a list of 15 names for people that they can get for a huge referral check? There's some technical things that would really have to be looked at as to how it was done, but it certainly wouldn't be reinventing the wheel because there are cities doing it.
Wouldn't you love it if someone came to you, if they spent a couple days getting names, 15 people, like totally money well spent
If there were
in
good
today's
candidates-
environment, 15 good candidates?
If there were good candidates to be found, we'll take them for sure. Family training and support, that's one of those things I think people probably don't value until they need it. I don't know if that's gonna make a difference. Again, I think that's would be part of a bigger picture on why this is a good place to work, because the city does these things for me and people have had a chance to experience it. And again, similar with retirement transition assistance.
I don't think people will value family training and support proactively, but I think it might help you avoid the stresses that cause people to leave. So it might not pay for itself in allowing you to recruit someone you wouldn't otherwise recruit, but it could let you keep someone you wouldn't otherwise keep.
Do we have a EAP and a counseling service sort of that does those two things?
We do have an EAP. We've found that a lot of the healthcare administered EAPs fall short of getting the one-on-one service that people need. But we found really good success citywide with the mental health support, contracted mental health support services that we have with Marie Ridgway's office.
And is that just for officers currently?
We implemented it in 2020 citywide.
But I mean, is it only the employee? Because this is highlighting for families, the
I
families of
believe
the
that I
officers.
think if they
Right
can bring
now
a
it's-
spouse, I think, but I think it's generally focused on, employee focused.
So I would support broadening that.
So, so I'll give you kind of Alan's basic thoughts with the same, knowing the same amount of information that you guys have right now. We were only able to hit the high points in the discussion, but he generally wasn't in favor of the paid sabbatical, vacation reimbursement. The health insurance he thought was maybe a discussion to have citywide. I kind of talked about the difference that law enforcement has in their earlier retirement age. He thought about maybe considering the health club membership. He did like the idea of a fitness incentive because it related specifically to the job. We had a discussion on the take-home squad cars. He saw that obviously it's more frequently done in outstate Minnesota. Didn't feel like he had a real strong lean one way or the other. And I think generally speaking, you know, for the community service, he supported that more if it was only in the city of Corcoran, which I don't know which, you know, if that makes a difference for our employees that live farther away versus closer.
How many officers live in Corcoran now?
One.
There aren't a whole bunch of
Opportunities.
mobile hope,
We do it the
Which-
same. Sorry.
huh?
Go ahead.
They could use it, they could use, but you guys are there almost all the time anyway,
Yeah.
but.
And I think he had heard of the referral and hiring bonuses and was somewhat in support of talking about that more. So, since that time, we've had Maggie, our finance person, just run some numbers. None of this is locked in, it's made-up numbers and made-up timeframes, but if you're looking at a rank order of what things would cost the city. So we
See if I
have,
can make it bigger.
we have all of our police officers in the top row. I would advocate, just as we already run into some wage compression issues, including myself and the lieutenant, but we are broken out as separate on the bottom as well. So for the sabbatical, what that would, basically an employee would accrue if we did something like 30, every 4 years, 30 days, that would basically be an employee accruing 7.5 days per year. The annual cost to administer that for the whole department would be about $24,000 and an additional $7,000. So just over $30,000 if we were to do the sabbatical a year is what the accrual cost would be. Those would obviously be scheduled out so that there wasn't competing time, and I think the value of that is that it would be a known quantity where people would have to schedule it at least a year in advance or with whatever stipulations we put in place. So that as a total runs about $30,000. A vacation reimbursement would cost, if city did something like $1,000 a year, would cost approximately, right now, about $12,000 a year. The health insurance contribution, the numbers used was $300 a month. That comes out to be $3,600 per officer. That ends up being in the range of $43,000.
How would that grow over the course of a 30-year career? Is that invested somehow, or is it just putting cash in a bank account, basically?
So I think that's part of what the city would, however the city decided to structure that. So I think the city could either, if the city chose and was able to legally fund that liability as it was incurred, I believe the city would put that money in an investment account and probably earn interest on it. If it's not an employee entitlement or employee owned at the time, I think the city could choose to do whatever it wanted with that interest.
Because the value to the employee could be a lot higher if it's in an index fund for 30 years
Yeah.
versus putting the same amount of money into something else on the menu.
Except you'd have to get into the realm of non-qualified retirement plans.
So I know that you're here, John.
I know, and the person, I have done almost no investigation as to whether or not we could do that. And the person I was gonna reach out to just had a baby. But yeah, I mean, could potentially be an option for somebody if there was a non-qualified plan available for certain employees.
And in my mind, that's really why I was kind of going the one-time upon retirement, meeting this criteria as a one-time check, as opposed to you accrue a benefit this each year, because then you do run into are you administering a retirement healthcare plan, or are you just funding your city liability? And so I think the cleaner way is to say, if you retire with at least 10 years of service with, this much, you're entitled to this much upon these conditions being met upon separation. This just tells, in the long run, if the city were to fund that liability, what it would cost. So what would that cost us at the end of this year? Well, likely not much, because not all of those officers are retiring, and there is a true cost to it. So that lets basically lets us know what liability that's the liability that would be incurred.
Maximum, because some of these people, not all these people are gonna reach retirement with our company. Or-
Yep, and certain people will leave, and, I would assume that the city would set in the policy what level, if the city was to fund that liability, that you'd only fund it to 120% and then stop paying into it, or,
Odds are odds are pretty good we'd never be, well, I guess we'd have a separate account, and it could potentially be overfunded if people,
separated
Yeah.
and draw. So again, the devil's in the details on how it would be structured if you decided to go down that road. The fitness incentives was written as $100 a month. I would probably say that that's more of an annual payment, but the number just for calculating, if you did something like $1,200 a year, that comes out to be just over $14,000 net cost. The education incentive as a percentage of base wage, that just figures 2% for every employee. That comes out to be just over about $21,000. The compensated community service hours, that price tag actually surprised me a little bit as well. That came in at about $25,000. And then the other numbers in the following right three columns are just extrapolated out if they were as part of the wage. The net cost for the take-home squad cars, this is aside from the capital outlay of adding the 4 cars, would be a net cost of roughly $11,000, just over $11,000 a year. So that one has a lot greater upfront cost if you're looking at 4 squad cars. Right now, I think we budgeted in that it'd be about $75,000, $75,000 to $80,000 per squad car for the initial outlay. So you're looking at roughly $300,000, and then with an annual cost of about $11,000 or $12,000. That Maggie figured as if 30 miles per day extra on a vehicle, getting 25 miles per gallon, average, our officers would average about 3.3 day trips to work a week, which we averaged out to 4, considering there's occasional training days and things like that. So, yeah, I guess I'd like to go kind of round robin, see if you guys have any either questions or clarifications, but also see where you landed and where you thought the most value lied. I think the things that would set us apart by far the most are the sabbatical, the vacation, and the retirement health insurance would be the things that I think people would take note of in a job description or in a job posting. That's not to say those are the only ones that would make a difference. And obviously this discussion is separate from the contract negotiations, but if the city so desired, it could be incorporated into those discussions. So you want to just start at one end or the other, and I'd be interested in hearing, or Jess, I guess, if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I would just add, as we talked about, we are interested in looking overall at our entire compensation structure. And so if we are looking at moving forward with some of these ideas, they might be good ideas for the entire city, depending on how they work out. I know Public Works had mentioned a couple ideas related to changes in the employee handbook. So those are other things that we'd be considering that would be kind of universal ideas for retention and recruitment as well, related to how we, like paying out a portion of vacation time is an idea that I've heard recently, as well as looking at how our percentages are for when you leave and retire, and what those percentages look like. So those are some things we're looking at, but that's definitely something as we look at the broader picture of compensation and employee retention will be something we want to look at, how it can work universally.
There's nothing on here I don't like. Well, it's probably smart to prioritize and do the ones that Matt feels are the most impactful. I have no reason to dispute that, columns M, N, and O are probably going to have the biggest positive impact, so I wouldn't be opposed to all of those. I like the idea of the compensated community service hours as well, but the cost to the value seems out of whack, at least as part of the initial path. Maybe that's something you come back to. I also like the education incentive as a way to acknowledge and reward higher levels of skill. But to Jessica's point, that makes sense across the city. Maybe that's not something you worry about outside of the global change.
So one benefit there, and one benefit ends up with a employee set with higher skills, and that's the education incentive. And I do a lot of consulting on benefits with my clients, and then also I have a employee benefit expert guru in my house also. We talk about this stuff all the time. And for me, we're gonna wait. For me, there's a hurdle that we have to overcome in every single one of these, and that's the cost versus the value to the employee. So for example, if an employee wants if an employee wants vacation reimbursement and we say, okay, well, we'll give you up to $1,000 per year in vacation reimbursement, but you gotta use it on vacation, they're qualifying things. Or we'll give you $500 more in salary. Oh, well, with one, there's a set of criteria that I have to do to earn the $1,000 of reimbursement, or the other, I just get $500 and I can buy a new scuba set or something, whatever floats your boat, no pun intended. So another option, like literally, if we just took all of the columns and said, we're not gonna offer, we could take even healthcare insurance, we could take anything and say, you know what? We're not doing any benefits for the city of Corcoran, but we're gonna take all of these things that we're thinking about and we're just gonna increase everybody's wage by $15,000. And you do it, you can buy a boat, you can buy a half of a car, if you can find one. So I think I'd be comfortable with all of these if it met the criteria of that we get. I think we need to have a survey of existing employees and really hone in on whether this is something they want. And I think all of them could be potentially valuable. I just don't know if they're worth the dollar amount that we are that we're talking about, or perhaps, I think in my case, the sabbatical sounds like a good idea, but I would never, ever count it as a big hurrah for me at my company, because I just never have used it. And, I mean, I'm not sure how many people would actually take a 30-day sabbatical, even if it was mandatory. So I want to know what, and not, more than anecdotally, what people want, more than, like, this is good information. We got to figure out if this is what people want before we, as people who aren't working for the city right now, what we think. Like, I think X, but it doesn't matter because I'm not an employee. And we have to do homework to decide if this is something that people want. I'm totally open to all of them, even ones that aren't up here. If somebody, it sounds like you did a good job rounding up opinions. But if we're spending the money, we got to make sure that people appreciate it and like it and want it.
Yeah, and I would just, as a brief response to it, say that I think that the wages are something that we, as I've said, we have to address independently, just to make sure that we're competitive. I think if you were to take these items, convert them into wages, the wages, obviously to an employee becomes somewhat of an entitlement of this is what I worked for and this is what I'm getting compensated at. And we're looking at trying to be a good place to work and something that sets us apart from wanting to work here versus a South Lake or a Maple Grove. I think this is something that a person can hold in their hand and say this is what makes Corcoran different as opposed to just the paycheck. And I think it shows intention, and it shows an intentional act to be attentive to our employees, I believe. And to your point, if it is something that holds value to them, so whether that's a rank order survey or however you guys want to find a way to quantify that, we can work on that as well.
So it's, my company has like really robust, non-monetary incentives like these. And we're always ranked as a awesome place for women to work, awesome place for mothers to work, awesome place for people with families to work, like, and so it is a incentive that works. So I totally agree with you. We just have, and so I'm not saying, I'm saying two things. I'm agreeing with you. Pay is important too. So that's another discussion. We just, part of also designing this is being a good listener as to what's important. And so I'm not making the suggestion that anyone would say, yeah, just give me 10 grand in cash. I don't need any. Some might, but, and maybe we wouldn't want those people anyways. I don't know. But I think we have to, as the organizational leaders, understand to the best of our ability specifically what people are after and what they value.
Yeah, I think that sort of, whether it's a survey or what it is, and I know that the list was kind of created with feedback of the officers to get here in the first place, but maybe, being able to tell a little more if it was just someone's top one, or if there's one that's in, 8 people's top 3 or something like that. I think that would be really helpful, kind of to John's point, I think, of, knowing what's important to them.
So also think about it like if you had a vacation reimbursement and a fitness incentive to the city, that's less expensive than the additional retirement healthcare contribution. So like potentially there's some give and take on there too. Like,
Absolutely.
Here are 3 incentives, or here's another incentive. I don't know. It's just this is a good starting point. And sorry to interrupt.
No.
But I was going off your.
That's great. Yeah, and I think kind of the few that you highlighted too as maybe having the biggest impact, I tend to agree. They seem like they would for recruitment and retention specifically, but there's nothing on the list that just scares me that says, oh, absolutely not. I can't look down that route, and I think we're feeling the same on that. There's nothing that's just an absolute take that off the list at this point.
So it sounds like to me in order for you guys to see what you want to focus your efforts on. You'd like to hear feedback from the officers in the form of a survey. So for instance, if we were to send a survey to all the police officers and said, rank order these 1 through 10, take your top 10, rank order them 1 through 10, and then get a composite score of them, so you guys would see, here are the top 5 that carried the most weight for the employees, and then you guys could kind of dial in with saying, well, we're not going to do 5, but we're going to do 4, and they're by value base, kind of.
I would propose a slightly different survey design. Rather than force ranking, somebody might love all of them. I would maybe look for A, B, C, D, F rating, like
Grade.
A would be, this is a strong incentive that would make me want to preserve my relationship with the city, even if I got an equivalent offer. Or a slightly better offer even. And then down to, F, I see no value in this for me at all. And then based on that kind of a rating across the officers, we can look at the cost and try to do a cost benefit. I think if it's a force rank, you don't really get a sense for, well, maybe somebody's number 1 still isn't all that good. Maybe for that person, it's a C, and there's nothing we can do for that person in a menu like this to make them.
So if we ask them to grade them 5 through 1, with 5 being the most number of points for value in keeping me here as an employee or attracting as an employee, 1 being the least, do that, have each employee do that for all of them, and then we can kind of average out, figure out what the average score of each one was, whether things came in at a 4.5 or a 2.5.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there, yeah, can, this, I'm gonna say this aloud, but I don't know if I'm gonna advocate for this. My wife has 25 years of employee benefits and compensation experience. That's like all she did is survey employees and ask them what's important to them and literally design benefit plans and literally design compensation plans for executives and line people. Is there a way that we can just do a survey subcommittee of me, you, and Jeremy, and just have a little bit of a, put our heads together on it?
You guys tell me
Works
how
for
you'd
me.
like to do it.
Fine with me?
Yeah.
We
Because
can't
she was
make that
sa-
decision here, though, can we?
We probably can't make it formally here, but we could certainly add that as an agenda item
Yeah.
tonight if we want to, as a end to the agenda, so maybe a 10, F, since we already.
I think we have it 10 after.
And it can be as easy, it can be as simple as just emails. Like back, we don't have to have 10 meetings or something.
One of the things.
Because I have a lot of ideas about the survey, and so do you. Let's just do it right and not to say that you do it wrong, but since we both expressed strong opinions about survey compensation or composition, let's just
Works for me.
have just a little conversation outside these walls. And so if we're on a committee, we can exchange emails and be official about it.
I think that sounds good. It'll also allow you guys to hear directly from the employees. So I think that's,
Well, no, we would,
good.
we'd help design the survey, we wouldn't,
Yeah.
Conduct the survey.
yeah.
And then hear back.
As we're talking about how this might be something across the board, is it something that we'd like to get feedback from the rest of the staff on as we're thinking about ideas?
I think we should do,
Just
or the
trying to-
ones that are transferable.
For
Yeah,
transferable,
like
okay.
some, take-home squads probably doesn't mean a lot to the administrative side of
Public Works driving dump trucks home probably isn't high on.
take-home snowplows.
What pickups? I mean, I think there, I mean.
Yeah,
as a
there
hammer
are.
home that-
Road graders.
That there's a lot of parallels between, I mean, there's no equivalent job, obviously, and they all have different roles, but I think of, and I think Matt would echo this to some degree, that, Public Works is the forgotten emergency responders. We are technically an emergency responder. We're, as an organization, APWA is advocating to be emergency responders, but we're out there in bad weather, we're supporting a different role in a fire event. We may be on the scene shutting down traffic. We may not have the exact same role as fire or PD, but, you know, we're an emergency responder too. So I just want to hammer home that point that it's, we're facing the same headwinds, maybe not as publicized. We might be the umpire, and they might be the star player in the all-star game in terms of publicity. But I just want to hammer home and echo that fact that this applies, I think, across everything. There are sensitivities to PD, and there are certain things that are different, but there are a lot of parallels too. So I want to advocate for a lot of these. I could develop a similar pattern that might be labeled differently, but I do think there's more parallels than differences.
Would it make sense for you to sit in with this subcommittee and maybe try to see if you could come up with a public works specific one based off of it, and where to tweak it, what things are just kind of transferable?
I mean, I think they go hand in hand. I mean, there's certain processes and timelines that may be different, but I do think there has to be elements of a comprehensive solution, or, you know, program, or whatever you want to label it. So I mean, I think we can have a dialogue about what that looks like, but I think it should be part of the dialogue would be my recommendation. And maybe the surveys are different that go out to each one, and maybe they're focused for each one. I don't know. I think it should be part of the discussion as we implement the survey.
Okay. Yeah. I think maybe the best way would be to start with meeting with the group, and then whatever you guys decide from that, whether it's a separate survey or just part of the same process, and we're making sure to keep that side of things in mind.
And I would say there's an element of timeliness only as it relates to if something is to be incorporated into a labor agreement or not. You know, it's not interdependent, and I would actually advocate for the city administering these independently as opposed to negotiating an outcome, just because it would really, some of these have a greater function and purpose to them other than just employee compensation. And I would have concern about losing that focus if it becomes solely contractual in a way that doesn't necessarily fully support the direction that we're additional outcomes we're intending, especially as it relates to some of the wellness and the recommendations that some of these come right out of from our mental health provider and things like that. So I think there's an element to consider there, and I think having that dialogue as to how does this extrapolate out, how does this apply to other parts of it, is certainly a conversation that needs to be had. So.
Sure.
Forgot something.
How was your meeting?
Very good.
That's good.
Yep.
Okay. Was there anything else before we adjourn this one?
Thank you, guys.
Any other feedback you guys are wanting from us?
Is that helpful, Matt?
I think it has our next step, which is always good, so we'll see what you guys are able to come up with for this survey as we work on that.
I do want to say one thing. We need to have we actually need to add the capital cost of the cars to the economics of it. Because in theory, having people have their own take-home cars will cost us the same as all the other potential incentives. So as a
Startup, yes. Carrying cost of that is $12,000 a year.
And maybe some projection of what our anticipated growth of the department is in X number of years. I mean,
Wait, no, carrying costs would be more than that, because there's depreciation and, yeah, there'll be like a 70 grand when we trade in a car, we get typically, I don't know, I'll just make it up. On the Explorers, it's 21 grand, we have to buy them for 70. I mean, there's gonna be an incremental cost of the fleet each year, not specifically related to just mileage. The capital outlay is gonna probably be 20 grand a year in maintaining the fleet.
Per car?
No, I think in total, I don't have the numbers, but I'm saying it's just part of the equation. That the city spend is gonna be real, so we have to, anything that spends additional money, we have to account for that.
Yeah, I think there'd be a slight depreciation. I mean, obviously the cars wouldn't be turning over as fast, so instead of trading in a car that's 3 years old with with 90,000 miles on it, we would be trading in a car that's 6 years old with 90,000 miles on it. So, but that same car would be had for twice as long, but a 6-year car doesn't have the same return that a 3-year car does. So, yeah, I think I see the element of depreciation. I also know that we would get longer out of the vehicles. How all of that plays out, we'd have to,
That's why we hired Maggie.
yes.
We just have to figure out, there's an insurance, I'm just kind of speaking on the taxpayers'
Yep.
side of things is, public, and not, we're all public people, like, we're all government, so like, I'll throw me under the bus. They always have this, thing where they forget to include capital costs in government expenditures, and it drives me bananas. Like for light rail, they always only include like the wage of the train driver. They never include all the capital outlays. So I have to practice what I preach, and if there's more to the story, there's insurance, there's just all kinds of different additional things that go into a capital expenditure.
And there's political parts of that as well, that, there's the politics of a Corcoran squad car sitting in Maple Grove, or Becker, or Zimmerman as well, that,
Sure.
It raises questions. It also might, depending on how many people obviously we're electing to take advantage of that, could alleviate some of our storage issues that we currently have here, because
There you go.
we're running out of places to keep this stuff.
No storage needs if everyone at Public Works just drove a big old tractor or something home every night.
Take a plow truck home.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be talking about taking plow trucks.
Good deal.
I like the creativity though.
All right, I
What's
think
missing?
we got the next steps figured out.
I think we've got next steps to
Perfect.
figure out. Thank you guys for taking the time, and that's an important,
Of course.
a really important thing for our organization, to be thinking about, not only in the current market, but just in general as we continue to grow and to move forward.
For sure. Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.